All right.
Okay.
So my name is Dr. Bridget Tate. I'm a licensed psychologist here in Texas. We decided to do this podcast to try to get as much information as we could out about what's going on in Texas in the state of mental health here, but also how we as providers can be helpful for our communities. And so I have Dr. Brandon Sylvester here, who is a licensed clinical psychologist with over a decade of practice experience in both forensic work and community mental health. Um,
Mhm.
so he's seen it from both sides, I think from the most extreme to just the everyday run of the mill stuff. Um, and so I'm excited to have you here because uh, I think you can give a pretty holistic picture of what you've seen with men's mental health. So tell me a little bit, or tell the public a little bit about your background more specifically.
Fair enough. Thank you for having me on. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this morning or this afternoon. Yeah, so I will try to answer and respond from both the private practice perspective as well as from the clients I saw in the juvenile population in the Harris County in the other half of the socioeconomic spectrum because um, more than likely what we talk about today with respect to men's health, the responses will be different based on the cultural differences and the differences in socioeconomic status and things like that. So yeah, I will try to approach it from both sides. But yeah, I'll say that I forgot. What did you ask?
So I guess I gave you the introduction, but tell me a little bit about like your practice experience, your education, how you got, what got you into the field actually.
So I was always that friend that the friend group would go to for advice or for when it's time to just like, for one-on-one conversations or deeper conversations or another perspective or just a vent. And I just kind of thought that was my natural role in all the different friend groups and social groups that I've been in. And it just so because I've always had a really easy time understanding people, understanding where people are coming from. Like I can I learned at an early age that you can validate a person's feeling without validating the behavior, like because the behavior may not be valid at all. But the feelings that led to it, of course, make sense to that person. So I've always understood that, and it's always been really easy for me to empathize with almost anyone. Um, Through happenstance or just divine intervention, I ended up working at an elite mental health hospital or psychiatric hospital with zero psychiatric training at the time. And then things just took off from there. I pursued a career in it because it made sense to me.
Mhm. I will say that you are one of the go-to people that I have. So you have kept that energy. So thank you for that and bringing that to the world. All right.
Listen, I'm here for it.
Yeah. So this this podcast is specifically about well, this episode is specifically about men's mental health. I don't know about if you have seen this in your practice, but certainly for me, I see a lot of men coming in. They have concerns, but they're I think hesitant about one speaking to me as a female who doesn't really share the same experiences in it seems like they're concerned that I won't empathize or I won't be able to treat, I won't have the expertise.
Hmm.
But also, too, they're a little bit also hesitant to seek out a male therapist. And I kind of have a good understanding about why that might be. But again, I am in fact not an expert in men's issues. I have these training of a licensed psychologist, but I don't have that specialization. So um, I wanted to see if you could shed some light about what maybe you've seen in the field. And then I have some very specific questions, but that's high level. So let's talk about that first.
Okay, I'm on board with
So tell me what broadly, what are you seeing coming through the door?
So, with respects to men's mental health, so I mean, start because, like I said, I mentioned before, the answer will change based on population. And
Mhm.
so, in my private practice, I'm going to start by answering based on my private practice, where I see predominantly middle class, working class men and women, but we're talking about men today. So, most of them are married. Most of them are at the stage of life where they have multiple children or in the process of having children. Like
Mhm.
literally, their wives or significant others are pregnant, but most of them are at that phase of life. On the other hand, there's the other populations I've worked with where it's like kind of lower socioeconomic status, and I'm working with juveniles or younger men who are either just kind of graduating and like just starting to leave the nest. And so they're encountering obviously a different phase of life and different problems adjusting to life. But let me start with the aforementioned population. With the middle class married men, I would argue that some of the biggest issues we're coming up against are just the idea of where is it safe? Where is it safe? Like I'm being told, be an alpha man, but I'm also being told, don't be toxic, don't venture into toxic masculinity. So where is that fine line? And then on top of that, that's kind of best case scenario. On top of that, where is that fine line that I want for myself, where this is how much alpha or beta I am versus this is how much toxic masculinity I buy into versus what I want for myself, what you want for me, what you want me to be like versus what I want to be like, what I naturally gravitate towards. And that's after a lot of progression in therapy, right? Like we got to get to that point. A lot of times they walk in the door not even knowing that's the source of their anxiety.
Mhm.
Does that
Cool.
make sense?
It does. And I'm trying to, it sounds, it sounds very binding, but I can't think of a better word than that. But
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
sounds like a lot of binding. Like how do you have an identity and be true to that identity while being accommodating to the expectation of everybody else? That's what I heard. That hurt
Right.
my I felt that in my chest. Oh my God. Okay.
Right.
And
Well, because it's not a struggle that's specific to men, right? Because we can have that same conversation when it
intersectional,
comes
yeah.
to racial culturation. Have that conversation when it comes to women in the workplace
Mhm.
and balancing the workplace versus home needs. But since we're talking about mental health, it falls right in there because on top of that, then you have to look at internalizing versus externalizing and how men just try to naturally veer towards, or at least it feels like what I'm seeing a lot of is men naturally veering towards I'm not safe to say it, so I'm just going to internalize it.
Okay. So I did not know that. So I know what internalizing and externalizing means. But for like the lay people, can you say a little bit more about
Excellent point. So when it comes to externalizing, we can do it in healthy ways or unhealthy ways, right? Or maladaptive ways. Healthy ways, you externalize by talking to friends, you'll write in your journal, you'll go for a jog, you'll get the negative energy from frustration, from anxiety, from depression, from self-judgment, from insecurity, all whatever negative energy is in you, you'll get it out, you'll externalize it. Whereas internalized coping mechanisms are more just like keeping it within yourself, right? So like I'm processing it mentally, I'm getting quiet, I'm shutting down, I'm isolating, I'm withdrawing from other people. I'm just kind of I'm dealing with it, right? Is the way that most people would put it. But you don't the problem with internalizing the bigger problem more than anything else is closed systems don't get any information from the outside. So whatever biases you have growing up, whatever traumas, whatever you've been through, that's how you're processing it, and no new information is coming in. You don't have the homeboy saying or the friend saying, well, you really kind of tripping, or you really might want to take another look at it. It's just a nice little bubble of you and your thoughts, and you end up with more you.
that? This is super interesting to hear you say because my next question was about stereotypes in men's mental health.
Right.
But I know a stereotype that I hear a lot in the media is about how aggressive men are and how destructive. And based on what you just said with externalizing, um, that would match the aggression better, like if men were externalizers, like truly. But what you're
Mhm.
saying is that men are internalizers, like they're more self-insulated and protective. It sounds like they're not actually putting stuff out in the environment. Um, so
Well, if I could put an asterisk on that. That's kind of, at least again, from my experience, that's kind of another point of division between the have and the have-nots, if you will, for lack of a better way to put it. Those in this population of middle-class married men with consistent, stable jobs, in other words, their basic needs are met so they can move on to higher order needs. right?
Okay.
Those are the ones I'm talking about in that respect. Those the have nots, if you will, who are still kind of struggling to just get that basic need, food, shelter, respect. They do kind of, or at least from my experience, I do see them veering a lot more readily towards those stereotypical, externalized, acted out, cuss, throw stuff, act a fool, drink your problems away, and then act out when you get drunk and then have to deal with the consequences of it the next morning. You do see that in that population a lot more. And my theory, at least my working theory on that, and we can kind of get more into it later if you want, but my working theory on that is just that basic needs aren't met. I can't afford to focus on these high order needs. I still need my significant other, my parents or whoever to respect me. Right. I got to show them that I'm a man. And those in the have category have already done that because they have a job, they're living independently, their manhood is not in question.
That was a lot. That was that was a lot of things said. That was a lot of things said, and I have so many questions. I don't even know where to start. Uh, okay, so basic needs is the being met, and the level that has happened or been achieved leads to different patterns.
This
Whether
is a theory,
they
right? I
a
won't I
theory.
won't call this
And I
PhD or
hold a
Pearson.
similar theory because this is actually, I've done that research. You've read that research. Um, and yeah, like I'm into the internalizing, externalizing, and how that leads to juvenile justice
Mhm,
outcomes and like predicting that, right? So I'm
mhm.
following you. Let's break it down for the public. So why is it that basic needs not being met leads to externalizing for men specifically, as opposed to depression, which would be that internalizing. Um, and
Mhm.
then what I heard you saying, what I'm interested in hearing you say more about is how that is attached to manhood and how that's defined. Is that something that
Mm.
is being like an idea that is fed to the culture? Because I have heard that quite a bit.
Mhm.
Or is it an internalized thing and just like a part of the process? Can you just explain a little bit more?
Absolutely, absolutely. I worked with for about 5 or 6 years. I worked with the gang court of the fourth largest county in the country and the drug court. And in that experience, of course, you don't treat kids in isolation. You treat the whole family.
Right.
So in that time, I'm working with parents and I'm working with kids. And what you see is that basic needs, the need to feel loved, the need to feel valid, the need to feel respected, Trump, those got to get met first. Like, imagine you're pouring the champagne down the champagne pyramid with the glasses or whatever that's called, right? And those you're going to keep pouring, but the bottom glasses got to get filled up first. Those basic needs got to get met first, and those basic needs are met in that population, right? Because they haven't proven it. They haven't been given that stamp of approval that yes, you are valid, you are a man, right? So they don't have the ability, the freedom, if you will, to go off, read the books, go to the schools, get the different life experiences, be around different type of men who aren't the stereotypical version of man, right? But they're still successful and they're still happy and they still have the life that you want to have. All you have is what you see as a model. And in those communities, you don't, those men grew up as boys who didn't get that opportunity either. So they grow up to raise boys to become men, again, who don't have those basic needs met. So they can't venture out to get those higher order needs met, to experience manhood from another perspective. So they end up accepting the stereotype because that's all they've seen.
Yeah. So in the communities where like gang violence and like drug culture is most prevalent, how do you feel we as clinicians can be most impactful? Because we don't typically supply like basic needs such as food, shelter, things like that. We usually
Mm.
supply coping strategies and attempts at self-actualization. But how can we be how I guess how can clinicians come in and be like, hey, I recognize that you don't have these things,
Mhm.
but let's talk about this. Like, how can I help?
I would argue two things stand out that we can offer that are both valuable and intangible, and that's hope and empowerment, right? The hope that things can get better, the empowerment that that gives you the idea that you can make them better, that you have some sort of control over your life, right? We can support, we can foster, we can plant and then water the seeds of an internal locus of control,
Say more
which,
about that.
speaks to fluidity.
Mhm.
So it's real, learned helplessness is the thing, but even being defeated repeatedly, or at least perceiving defeat repeatedly, or or not succeeding as quickly as you want to succeed, can lead to just giving up, right? So part of the role of the therapist or the clinician, if you're lucky enough to have a client from a very difficult population, or who's had a hard life, that is at the point in their life to where they can seek out therapy or court ordered therapy, and you, either way, you have an opportunity to work with them. One of the most important things we can do is just plant the idea that it doesn't have to be this way, right? Life may water that idea. They may have to water that idea. You may not get to sit under the tree of the seed that you plant, but you got to plant that seed and water the hell out of it anyways.
So we're basically, the goal is to, as much as possible, like counter that programming that they're probably getting, that this is the way and the only way.
To First, we plant the seed of hope, and in the process of planting the seed of hope, we have to bring their awareness to it, right? So it's kind of that fine line between accountability, right, and help, and not being so warm as a clinician that you just make it okay for their BS to normalize their poor decisions or poor coping mechanisms, like to kind of foster an idea of accountability, but also at the same time to walk that fine line between accountability and validation. Now, I understand and it makes sense why you felt that way. How you handled that feeling has led you here, and you don't want to be here.
That's I have a million questions about that, but maybe we need to have a separate podcast for that.
I'm
Um,
here for it.
I didn't recognize how deep this could go. Um, how many intersections, I would say, um, whenever I initially decided on this episode, how many intersections we would talk about so quickly. We've only been talking for like maybe 20 minutes. So I heard you say culture, socioeconomic status. I heard you touch a little bit on like the readiness for change, the ability to change. So if a person is in a circumstance where they don't feel they have control over the situation, they're not ready for change. I have seen that across the board. So yeah, I want to talk more with you about the juvenile justice involved people, because that's also like another bind. Like those kids are embedded in a system where they don't have control over their family system, over education, over socioeconomic, and then how I want to know how to come in and, or I want to talk about how to come in knowing all this, to feel all those binds, and be like, look, kid, just give me like 5 years of your time, and I promise you, it's not gonna be like this. And
But
maybe
who's forward thinking
convincing.
enough to do that?
Uh-huh.
Right. What kid is patient enough, right, and forward thinking enough to, and has the frontal lobe capacity that would be required to say, okay, I will structure my life. I'll wait it out. I won't try to become a millionaire tonight. I won't try to improve my life situation instantly.
Right.
Because that's why they end up in juvenile justice system. It's because a lot of times it's a crime, right? And it's a crime because they wanted something that they weren't ready for yet. Either financially weren't ready for it or emotionally weren't ready for it.
Right. So what do we do? Like, what do we? I I'm fresh into the field, right? You've got
Okay.
at least a decade on me,
A
but
little bit.
I am I'm feeling like the kids are feeling, honestly. Like,
Mhm.
I understand that delayed gratification is an acquired skill. Let's assume that they don't have ADHD or autism, then
Oh,
that delayed gratification is just not there.
right.
But I'm going to tell them, look, kid, I know you have no power over all this. Just wait it out with me. And I know
Mm-hmm.
that they're not. I don't know. I know that like developmentally they don't have the ability to. But also, I'm exhausted with pulling these kids out of this river by the time they're in inpatient or by the time they're in juvenile justice.
In juvenile probation, right.
Right. How do we stop them from falling in the beginning. That it's exhausting. It's exhausting.
Yeah, that's a much bigger question than I have the mind space or the capacity to begin to answer. But to speak to your earlier question, how do we address the lack or the lack of readiness for delayed gratification? I would argue, or at least what I've been doing with the adolescents that I work with, is making the small steps along the way rewarding in and of itself, like helping them find the benefits of the small steps. Like you want to be a millionaire, but like congratulations on the first $20. Like let's talk about that and what that means, and really making a big deal out of that so that they make a big deal out of it so that they can kind of start to, because we can't fix the delayed gratification, let's get some immediate gratification that's within grasp, if that makes sense.
Yes.
That still works in the same direction or the same trajectory. Uh, does that make sense?
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you describe is being more anchored in the present, in the things that they can control.
Right.
Is that fair?
That internal locus control thing, that empowerment thing. To
Okay.
the bigger question you asked, how do we catch them before they get in trouble or before they make clear that they need help? Oof, that's a parenting question, right? And that's a systemic question. And then we're gonna start talking about racism. People are gonna get mad at us. So
we, there's a lot. So there's a lot. And this is I have a lot to talk about, which is why I wanted to do this podcast because there's a lot to talk about.
yeah, there is.
And
I'm grateful.
I'm ready to talk about it. So we can talk about the racism piece. We can talk about the epigenetic impact of trauma and how this is generations and generations. You mentioned the parenting. It's not just the parents, it's the grandparents, the great grandparents,
Right,
et cetera, et
right,
cetera.
right.
And we can't retrospectively correct any of that. But it's weighing down these kids currently. Um, and I don't think, I mean, like, I feel like we're doing the best that we can to keep up, but they're actively being traumatized currently with the state of things in this country.
Right, right. It's almost like we got to stop the bleeding before we can do the surgery, but like the bleeding never stops.
It doesn't. And my concern is that like the kids are the future, right? Like that is the reality of it. And let's assume that some like a certain number of these kids are going to be clinicians. A certain number of them are going to be surgeons. They're going to be government workers. They're going to be the police officers, and they're traumatized. What is that? I believe in people like their ability to recover and their ability to be whole. But if the trauma is getting worse and worse and it goes unaddressed, my concern is what is this going to look like maybe 10 to 20 years from now when we haven't really addressed a whole lot of it. I know this is about men specifically. They have their own issues to bring it back to the topic at hand. But if I could give the analogy, like we had maybe like 100 years ago, we had like a few bodies in the river. We were pulling them out. I think by like 2030, we're going to have a flood and we don't have the capacity to pull everybody out of the river.
We do
And
not.
there's a system that's in place that's profiting, of course, it's handling this, but not in 10 years, not at a rate that's going to be, I don't think we have the foresight. I don't think anybody has thought this through.
So it's like what we're talking about in my head, I conceptualize it as like, you know, the hero versus the villain origin story, right?
Mhm.
Like it's very similar. Both of them probably went through something traumatic, probably lost a parent, probably had some significant hardships, and what turns you into a hero versus what turns you into a villain. These kids that will eventually be our doctors, lawyers, nurses, trash men, and so on and so forth. These kids, the difference between, you know, the hero and the villain that they will develop into, in my experience and in my personal and professional opinion, is coping and comfort. Right? You become a hero when you get proper coping and proper comfort. You become a villain when you don't. Right? And so, what can we as therapists do? What can we as clinicians do for this generation to help have a few more heroes than villains? We can be that comfort. right? That's we can have that umbrella that you're safe here. We can go ahead and work through it. We can process it. We can teach the coping while giving them the comfort, because without it, they're going to become villains.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me as a female clinician, how to provide that to male identifying clients who come in. Um, how do I be impactful to not be patronizing and to make them feel as though they are still um, having validation that they are, I guess, the man, or like their masculinity is not being in question by the need to come to therapy.
I would argue, male or female, a good therapist has a non-judgmental demeanor and stance, right? Is warm, is welcoming, is accepting, is affirming, and is validating of those things that warrant validation and affirmation, right? So we can't, as clinicians, escape. We can't get away from the fact that we are role models, even to clients who are older than us, right? Because the assumption, for better or worse, is that we have our stuff together and we practice what we preach, and that the coping skills and that's the challenges and the way that we challenge our clients, that we do it to ourselves. Again, it's an assumption, but it's an assumption that's pretty common to clients that they make about us. So we can be good role models, right? And so as a female, what that means is you're not necessarily you kind of have a double dipping role. Your role modeling for the client as to how to handle life, how to handle oneself and what comes at you, but you're also modeling for the client how other women might see them and how other women might respond to them. And if it's safe to talk to you, maybe I can tell my wife. Maybe I can tell my mom. Maybe I can tell my girlfriend. Maybe they'll respond. Maybe if I process it with Dr. Bridget, it'll work out when I talk to such and such about it. Right. So you being a safe space creates the idea that someone else can be a safe space too.
Okay. So like shaping the worldview, trying to impact the worldview.
I'm on CBT.
Okay. All right. Now for the parents and the partners and the children of men who may or may not have mental health issues, how can they be supportive of their loved one through the process?
How can the parent be supportive of the loved one, or the family member be supportive of the loved one throughout the process? Uh, my honest response to that question is it's not that different. Like so much of being a clinician is just being a good human being. The sad part is that we need to pay people to be good human beings, right? Like sometimes our life is so inundated with people who don't seem to have genuine, unconditional, or care if they're not benefiting from it. That you got to go find somebody, and sometimes you got to go find a person that you got to pay, and that's okay, because as long as you find it, you're good. So I say that to say those same skills I listed earlier, like particularly the non-judgmental, like whatever you have to say, I'll put aside my belief on it, my thoughts on it, my prejudices, just to hear you out. That would be life changing for a lot of people if they can get that at home.
Just holding space.
Right. Just a willingness to hear something that I might disagree with and I might have feelings about, but I'm going to keep them to myself unless you ask for them. Just that bare minimum level of you can come to me-ness.
Hey, um, my my reaction to that is that everybody brings their stuff to the table, and um, I know how hard it is. Like I know that holding space is an acquired skill, and going through grad
Right.
school, definitely one that we actually, as a skill, we had to learn in like those
Yeah.
earlier
Yeah.
classes, right? So
Absolutely.
my reaction was thinking back to that, and what it took for me to learn that. So is there any resources or
Mm.
any, I guess, avenue that you can think of or remember that parents or loved ones can use to develop that skill for themselves in the absence of a therapist or another professional?
That is an excellent question. And my honest answer to that, or at least my most immediate answer, because I need to put more thought into that. And maybe I should before I offer this, I render this response, but I'm gonna render it nonetheless.
Take your time, take
My
your time.
honest response is that hurt people, right? But heal people too. If you're gonna have that space to let someone come to you in a non-judgmental way, you have to have gone through quite a bit of healing yourself. So introspection would have to be just introspection, with or without a therapist, with a best friend, with a partner or whomever, just aware of one's own hurts, right? You can't heal it unless you recognize or acknowledge the hurt. So just building an awareness of the things in life that have hurt you. You
It's a
I
preaching.
see it.
We are preaching today. Okay, so the best thing I heard you say, something along the lines of the best thing you can do to support your loved one going through their process is to heal.
That's what I said.
So
That's
that
yeah.
everybody's gonna get this healing. So that you don't bring that hurt to the
Right.
table.
And with recognition that healing looks different for everybody, or the healing process is different for everybody, right? So some people's healing process requires therapy. Some people's healing process requires artwork. Some people's healing process simply requires an apology, or just removing themselves from a traumatic or a hurtful environment. But it's just the recognition that I need to heal from something, so that then that recognition, that acknowledgement, can propel action.
Okay. All right. So that's a whole other episode in and of itself that I'm not going to begin. I think we only have a few more minutes, and I want to. We covered so much. Um, how can we make a positive societal shift on men's mental health, either as clinicians or just the general public? How can we be impactful in turning this ship around?
Great question. Great question. Deep question. And I'm certain there are multiple answers to it. Mine is to make it safe to have a conversation, to make it safe for a man to feel whatever and to say that out loud, right?
Mm.
Because the toxic masculinity, the things that we don't want, the all the worst things that can come from keeping it in, I think that those are those contribute quite a bit to the problems we're having in our society,
Yeah.
right? Which is not to say all of us men are the problem, but we're talking about men. So if we're talking about this side of the street, I'm gonna stay on this side of the street. So I would argue that the best thing we can do is just to make it safe to say this is my experience without getting canceled.
Without getting canceled. So
Right.
can I piggyback off that real quick?
Please, please.
My concern for men is that they have a lot to say, but I don't think society is ready and willing to hear it. There is a thing that's going around about sassy men, men who express themselves. And can you
Right.
imagine like how much I guess courage it takes to be honest and then to be like the person receiving that says, "Oh, you're being sassy" or something like that.
Well, you know, I'm getting judged for doing exactly what you wanted me to do because I guess I didn't do it the way you thought I was going to do it.
Yeah, so like people want them to open up, but they're not necessarily ready to hear um, what comes out if it's not wrapped pretty in the way
That's right.
that we want men to say it. Um, that is my concern. That is my concern for men. Um, but also, if they don't find the safe spaces to say it, um, what is that going to mean in the future? I'm really scared because I feel like what a lot of stuff that we are seeing is because men don't have the safe spaces to express things, and it's going to come out. I think that's like what we learned in like first couple days of grad school is that it's coming out either way, whether
Yeah,
that's
what it is.
violence, substance abuse, self-harm, domestic
Right.
violence, et cetera, it's coming out.
Going to war with another country just to prove something.
You know, God, we so we as society can just hear them out without putting a label on what masculinity is, without defining it, and then just be prepared to not place judgment on what comes out.
You know, I liken it to, I would say this. We need more changing stations in the men's bathrooms. And what
Okay.
I mean when I say that is, you know, society is saying this is not the 60s anymore. You can't just make a check, come home, smoke a cigar, have a drink, and let your wife raise the kids. You need to be
Mhm.
involved in the child rearing. All right, bet. Give him a son, take him to the bathroom. It's time for the baby to get changed. No changing
I have
stations in the
heard of that.
bathroom. Right.
Yeah.
There are no changing stations at a lot of restaurants, a lot of, you know, you go to Katie Mills Mall, you go to the malls, changing stations in the men's bathroom, right? Society, and I say this only to say we're not ready for what we're asking for,
Yeah.
right? You want men to express, are you ready to listen, right? Are
Yeah.
you prepared to honestly hear them out? Let them have the space to feel that without trying to make it uh, without trying to make it fit inside your box.
I'll try to make it fit. Okay. All right. Well, there's a lot that we've talked about. I have a lot to say. I have a lot of thought for you, a lot of questions, but we're out of time. Um,
I
thank you
really
so
enjoyed
much. Thank you so much for giving your time and your thoughts and your energy into this. And I hope that this helps somebody. Um, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and
it has been an absolute pleasure. It's a joy. It's always a joy speaking with you. You always have such deep questions, deep thoughts, and deep insights. So I learned from talking with you. So thank you. It's been a joy.
likewise, likewise.